Ethan Brooks had seen fire swallow buildings, watched smoke take the breath from good men, and held the hands of people in their final moments. But nothing had prepared him for the sight he saw that morning. The sun was just beginning to crest over the pine-covered hills that surrounded Grace Hill, painting his property in gold and shadow. Ethan stepped out of his farmhouse with a coffee mug in hand, the steam curling into the crisp mountain air. He was halfway through his usual morning routine when he heard a soft rustle coming from beyond the barn. A sound too quiet to be the wind, too deliberate to be wildlife. He rounded the corner, and his heart nearly stopped. There, standing in the middle of the open training yard, was an 8-year-old girl. Tiny and fragile, she looked like a doll lost in a field of giants. Surrounding her in a perfect circle were all 14 of his German shepherds. Muscular, trained, alert, Ethan had worked with them daily for years, but even he had never seen them like this. Still, silent, watching. "Grace," he whispered, the name catching in his throat like a prayer and a curse all at once. The girl didn't move, except for one small gesture, her hand, slowly rising into the air, fingers extended. Ethan's legs felt like lead, frozen halfway between instinct and fear. Then, something impossible happened. Zeus, the oldest and largest of the pack, stepped forward, but not to attack. Instead, he bowed his head beneath her hand, eyes soft, tail low, posture submissive. One by one, the others followed. The circle became a sanctuary. And Grace, the girl who hadn't spoken a word in over a year, stood at its center, calm as still water. Ethan exhaled for the first time in what felt like minutes. He remembered the first time he saw her, maybe 3 months ago. A quiet little thing with dark blonde hair and 2 old eyes peeking through the curtains from the neighboring farmhouse. The Millers had just moved in, Robert and Linda, the grandparents, taking in their granddaughter after the accident. The kind of accident people didn't talk about in detail. Slid off the road, icy bridge, no survivors but her. She hadn't said a word since. At first, Ethan kept his distance. He always had. People in town thought he was a recluse, a haunted man who preferred dogs to humans. Maybe they were right. After his wife passed and his best friend Max, the German shepherd who got him through every sleepless night after leaving the fire department, died at 13. The silence of the house became unbearable. So, Ethan filled it. One rescue turned into 2, then 5, then 14. All of them unwanted, labeled aggressive, misunderstood. He converted his barn into a heated kennel, set up fenced training fields, and found a rhythm again. Purpose, maybe. It was the dogs who noticed Grace first. Luna would linger by the fence, ears perked. Apollo would lie by the far gate, tail thumping when her shadow passed by. Ethan began to catch glimpses. Her small hand pressed to the glass, her eyes tracking the dog's every move. Then one morning, she was there, just standing at the property line while he brushed Athena. He didn't speak at first, just gave a nod. But the girl stepped forward, hesitantly, hand out. Ethan gave a low whistle. Apollo came to his side. "Gentle," he said, as if to both of them. Apollo leaned in. Grace's hand landed softly behind his ear. A tear slid down her cheek. From that day on, she came more often, never speaking, but always watching. Ethan showed her how to hold the leash, how to signal a sit, how to feed without encouraging competition. She soaked it in like sun through cold glass. He never pushed her, never asked about the accident. They had unspoken rules, both of them. Then one night, Linda called, said Grace had whispered something in her sleep. Luna. Just that. It was the first word in over a year. Ethan didn't know what it meant. He didn't ask. But he slept better that night than he had in months. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Grace had begun visiting the dogs at night. After her grandparents were asleep, she'd sneak through the tree line and sit near the fence, watching them under the moonlight. She brought treats sometimes, mimicked his training techniques, practiced hand signals. And somehow, over time, she had taught them more than even Ethan realized. That morning, as he walked into the circle and placed a steadying hand on Zeus's collar, Grace finally looked up at him. Her lips didn't move, but her eyes said everything. And Ethan knew then, these dogs weren't just saving him anymore. They were saving her too. The town meeting was louder than usual that evening. Inside Grace Hill's modest town hall, formerly the high school cafeteria, residents filled every seat and stood along the walls, their faces stiff with concern. A storm wasn't brewing in the skies above, but within the community itself. And at the center of it all was Ethan Brooks and his 14 German shepherds. 14 large-breed dogs? That's not a household, that's a kennel, Rachel Simmons snapped, her voice sharp as broken glass. What happens if one gate is left open? What happens when a child wanders too close? Ethan sat in the back row, arms crossed, his weathered face unreadable. He'd heard it all before. Still, the words cut deeper than usual. His dogs weren't just animals. They were family, lifelines. He glanced down at a photo tucked inside his coat pocket. Max, his first rescue, the one who saved him from the crushing silence after the fire that took his wife. Mayor Charles Avery cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. We're proposing an ordinance limiting residential properties to no more than 3 dogs. Current owners will have 90 days to comply. The silence that followed was heavier than any bark or growl. Ethan didn't speak. He simply stood and walked out before the vote, his back straight despite the weight pressing on his shoulders. Later that night, Ethan coughed so hard he dropped the water glass in his hand. The shatter echoed through the farmhouse, followed by the padding of paws on wood. Zeus arrived first, then Luna. The dogs sat around him, alert and concerned, as if sensing something was off. At the clinic the next day, Doctor. Helena Ramirez examined him with a furrowed brow. I'm ordering a chest scan, Ethan. You're not bouncing back like you usually do. He nodded, but said nothing. He already knew. The weight in his chest wasn't just sadness. It was something darker, growing. Meanwhile, across the property line, Grace was changing. She still hadn't spoken a full sentence in over a year, but she was communicating. Each night, once her grandparents thought she was asleep, she slipped out through the back porch, clutching her notebook, and made her way to the fence. What began as silent watching had turned into full-fledged training. By moonlight, she worked with the dogs. First, one at a time, then in pairs, then in formation. She mimicked Ethan's gestures, then created her own. A flick of her wrist meant sit. A circling finger meant group formation. She scribbled it all in her notebook, page after page filled with observations, commands, names. The dogs responded, not just with obedience, but loyalty. Athena would gently nudge Grace's hand with her nose if she seemed tired. Apollo began guarding the trail she used from the Richardson house to the kennel fence. Janet Hargrove, the local animal shelter manager, dropped by unannounced one morning to deliver supplies and noticed something odd. "You've been working them in new drills?" she asked, watching the dogs respond to hand signals Ethan swore he hadn't taught. Ethan shook his head slowly, puzzled. Not me. He started watching more closely after that. Found small footprints in the soil near the kennels, a candy wrapper beside the gate, the faint smell of strawberry shampoo in the hay. He had his suspicions, but part of him didn't want to know. If the girl was healing, that was enough. Then came the unannounced visit from CPS. Agent Dana Fuller stepped out of her sedan with a clipboard and a tone that was all business. "We've received concerns about a child being regularly exposed to a large number of unregistered dogs," she said. "I'm here to assess the environment." Ethan nodded silently and gave her the tour. She noted the reinforced gates, the cleanliness of the kennels, the feeding logs. Still, her eyes were skeptical. "These dogs aren't just rescues. They're trained," she admitted. "But that doesn't change the risk assessment. A child who's experienced trauma. This is not a conventional therapeutic setting." Ethan didn't respond. He simply pointed to the framed photo near the kitchen window. A little girl drawing beside Athena, Luna lying protectively beside her. A moment captured, a bond unspoken. Dana's expression softened, but only slightly. That evening, Grace didn't come to the fence. Ethan noticed. He waited under the porch light until well past midnight. Apollo paced. Zeus whimpered. But Grace never arrived. Instead, she sat at her desk, pen trembling over the paper. "They're going to take them away," she wrote in her notebook. Her eyes blurred with tears. "I have to show them before it's too late." Over the next week, Grace doubled her secret training sessions. She revised her signals, timed the response drills, taught them how to move as one. Even the older dogs responded, sensing the urgency in her every step, every breath. Across the property, Ethan's cough worsened. He covered it up with extra coffee, throat lozenges, silence. He couldn't afford weakness. Not now. Janet visited again. "You look pale, Ethan." "Just tired," he lied. On the 60th day of the ordnance countdown, Ethan received a letter. Final inspection scheduled in 2 weeks. If he couldn't rehome 11 of his dogs, they'd be forcibly removed. He sat on the porch that night, 14 pairs of eyes watching him, the quiet thicker than ever. "I can't lose you too," he whispered, barely audible, "not like everything else." Inside the house, a girl who had once lost everything stared at her hand-drawn plans under the flashlight. And in the barn, 14 dogs waited. Something was coming, and this time, the silence would not win. The morning sun bathed Grace Hill in a gentle gold, but Ethan Brooks felt none of its warmth. His breath came shorter these days, the pain in his chest no longer just an annoyance but a persistent weight. Still, he moved through his morning chores with quiet resolve, the 14 German shepherds trailing him like soldiers on parade. He didn't know how many more mornings he'd get like this. He just knew it wasn't enough. Across the property line, Grace Miller sat quietly at the breakfast table, her backpack already on. She watched the clock, every tick syncing with the plan she'd rehearsed for weeks. Her grandparents believed she was heading to school, but she had another mission today. As soon as their car turned down the street, Grace slipped out the back door, cutting through the woods she knew like the back of her hand. The town council, the mayor, and Agent Dana Fuller were scheduled to arrive at Ethan's property any minute. Today was the final inspection before the council voted on whether Ethan could keep the dogs. She had no more time to wait. They had to see. Ethan was showing Mayor Avery the new soundproofing in the barn when a familiar electric chill prickled his skin. Something was wrong. Janet, who had come for moral support, noticed it too. She followed his gaze to the far end of the field. And there she was. "Grace?" Ethan's voice cracked. The girl was already inside the exercise yard. The gate, normally secured with a padlock, was open. The dogs had all turned to face her, ears perked, alert but unmoving. Time slowed. "Someone call the Richardsons?" Janet shouted, grabbing her phone. "Keep everyone back?" "No," Ethan said hoarsely, already stumbling toward the field. She's not supposed to be. But Grace didn't look afraid. Standing in the middle of the grass, her tiny frame straight and still, she raised her right hand. One sharp flick. 14 massive dogs moved as one. They formed a circle around her, facing outward, tails still, eyes scanning. It looked more like a protective perimeter than a threat. "What the hell?" muttered Officer Marcus Lee, stepping forward before Janet stopped him. "Wait," she whispered. "Just wait." Another silent command from Grace, this time a step forward, and 2 fingers pointed toward the ground. The dogs dropped to a sit, then lowered themselves flat on their bellies. Total submission. Mouths hung open. Phones came out. Someone started recording. Ethan had stopped in his tracks, breath ragged. He hadn't trained them for this, not this coordination, not this level of response to her alone. Grace raised her hand again, this time directing Apollo to approach. The dog did, gently taking a treat from her palm. "She's been working with them," Ethan muttered, "all this time." Suddenly, a sharp pain exploded in his chest. Ethan gasped, clutched his ribs, and dropped to his knees. The last thing he saw was Grace turning, her mouth forming a sound no one had heard from her in over a year. "Stop!" she cried out. "They're helping him." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Zeus, the largest of the pack, bounded to Ethan and began rhythmic pressure on his chest, pressing with carefully controlled weight, exactly where Ethan had shown him during rescue drills. Luna sprinted for the house, disappearing through the dog door. Janet knelt beside Ethan, shocked to find a nitroglycerin bottle between her hands seconds later, delivered by Luna's careful mouth. "How did she started, but Grace's voice cut her off. "She knows I taught her." "You taught her?" Janet asked, not daring to believe. "I taught them all," Grace said. "At night. They're mine too." Agent Fuller, dumbfounded, lowered her clipboard. "This is beyond standard evaluation. These dogs aren't dangerous. They're trained like a tactical unit." Paramedics arrived to a scene of impossible coordination. A child giving clear commands, a pack of German shepherds executing emergency response, and a man fighting for his life in their care. Ethan faded in and out, catching flashes. Grace's voice, Zeus's weight on his chest, oxygen pressed to his face. He wanted to speak, to tell them it was okay, that she had saved him, that they all had, but the darkness pulled harder. As he was loaded into the ambulance, Ethan caught a final glimpse of Grace through the glass. Her face calm, hands steady, dogs seated in formation behind her like guardians made flesh. She raised her hand in a silent salute. And this time, Ethan knew he wasn't leaving them alone. He had kept his promise. The quiet beep of hospital monitors echoed through the sterile room as Ethan Brooks drifted in and out of consciousness. A tube delivered oxygen under his nose, and the ache in his chest had settled into a dull, unrelenting throb. But when he opened his eyes and saw Grace Miller sitting beside his bed, everything else faded. She held a worn notebook in her lap, pages full of dog sketches, training notes, and command sequences. Her hand slipped into his, small but steady. "You kept your promise," she whispered. Ethan blinked slowly. He remembered those words, spoken years ago on a snowy roadside as he knelt beside a mangled car. He'd promised a dying woman that her daughter wouldn't be alone. That daughter was now sitting at his side. Her voice returned, her eyes clear. Later that afternoon, while Ethan slept, Martha Miller quietly tidied the bedside table. As she moved his wallet, a faded photograph slipped out. A photo of Ethan in his fire department uniform, standing beside a younger couple holding a toddler. She froze. "Robert," she whispered, recognizing her son in the picture. Her hands trembled as she flipped it over. Scrawled on the back, Robert, Sarah, and Grace. Send off 2018, Captain E. Brooks. Martha sat down hard in the nearest chair. The pieces fell into place with terrifying clarity. When Howard arrived, she handed him the photo. Ethan knew them, she said. He was Robert's captain. Howard read the back and looked at his wife. And the night of the accident, they hurried back to Ethan's room. He was awake again, and when Martha showed him the photo, he didn't deny it. His eyes welled with quiet pain, and he motioned for a pen and notepad. I was first on the scene, tried to save them. Couldn't save Robert. Sarah made me promise I'd watch over Grace. Martha pressed her hand to her mouth. All this time, you were carrying that alone? Ethan nodded. I bought the land here when I heard you were moving in. I just needed to be close. Tears streamed freely now. That evening, Grace returned with Janet and Agent Dana Fuller. Janet had been coordinating care for the dogs in Ethan's absence, and Dana, who once considered Grace's connection to the animals dangerous, now stood silent, humbled by what she had witnessed. Martha handed Grace the photo. Honey, this was taken before the accident. Do you remember anyone in it? Grace studied the picture. Her finger landed on her parents, then traced over Ethan's face. That's you, she said quietly. I saw you, and that night. Ethan's breath caught. You remember? Grace nodded. You talked to my mom. You said, I'll watch over her. Everyone in the room went still. Even Dana looked shaken. That's why the dogs listen to me, Grace continued, looking down at her notebook. It's not just training. It's like they know we belong together. Dana sat down slowly. Grace, why didn't you tell anyone before? Grace shrugged. I didn't remember, not until I met the dogs. They brought it back. Janet stepped forward, her voice careful. Agent Fuller, you've seen how she communicates with them, how they respond. I've never witnessed anything like it, not in 30 years of animal rescue. Dana folded her hands. And I've never filed a report like the one I'm about to submit. But I'll say this. Removing her from that environment would do more harm than good. Martha squeezed Ethan's hand. You didn't fail, Ethan. You honored that promise. And you brought our Grace back to us. A few days later, the town gathered for another council meeting. This one very different in tone. Footage of Grace's silent demonstration had spread online, capturing national attention. Media vans had shown up in town, but more importantly, minds had begun to change. Officer Marcus Lee stood and addressed the room. We thought we were dealing with a public safety issue, but what I saw that day wasn't danger. It was discipline, love, and healing. Even Rachel Simmons, the loudest critic, stood and admitted, I was wrong. I judged based on fear. Mayor Avery nodded solemnly. The council will revise the ordinance. The dogs stay. Back in Ethan's hospital room, Janet delivered the news with a grin. Ethan smiled weakly and reached for his notepad. They're not just dogs, they're her future, maybe ours too. Spring painted Grace Hill in soft greens and warm sunlight the morning Ethan Brooks came home. The town had rallied, building ramps to his porch, setting up a hospital bed in the front room, and organizing a rotation of volunteers. Though his body was frail and the oxygen tank a constant companion, Ethan's eyes lit up the moment he saw the dogs waiting at the gate, tails wagging in solemn formation. Grace stood among them, clipboard in hand, already directing the morning routine. Welcome home, Mr. Brooks, she said with a proud little smile. You running the show now? Ethan rasped, his voice thin but teasing. Grace nodded. Just keeping your pack sharp, sir. Life settled into a strange, beautiful rhythm. Grace came every day after school, recording detailed notes on training progress, adjusting medication schedules with Janet, and even teaching the dogs new group commands. She'd named her notebook the Guardian's Code. One evening, Mayor Avery stopped by with a surprise, a handmade wooden sign bearing gold lettering. Janet, Martha, and Officer Lee helped mount it to the fence near the main gate. Guardians of Grace Hill, in honor of Ethan Brooks and the family he built. Grace traced the carved letters with her fingers. "I love it," she whispered. "So will the dogs." As summer turned to fall, Ethan's body weakened, but his spirit grew lighter. Every sunset, he'd sit on the porch, a blanket over his legs, Apollo at his feet, and Grace beside him, quietly reading from her notebook or chatting about a new training technique. "I'm not scared," he told Martha one evening when she came to check on him. "You should be," she said gently. Ethan smiled. "I've seen the worst the world has to offer. But this town, this girl, these dogs, they've given me something better than a second chance. They've given me peace." On the final night of his life, Ethan asked Grace to come early. She found him resting in his chair, the dogs gathered around like sentinels. "I've got something for you," he said, reaching for a sealed envelope. "Don't open it yet. Wait till I'm gone." Grace hesitated. "I don't want you to go." "I know, kiddo, but I kept my promise. Now it's your turn." The next morning, Ethan passed away quietly in his sleep. When Grace entered the room, the dogs were already there, silent, still, surrounding him in a perfect circle as if they understood. Grace opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a letter, written in Ethan's uneven handwriting. "Grace, I see now that the promise I made to your mother wasn't just about keeping you safe. It was about helping you find your voice, your strength. You've done more than that. You've given purpose to me, to these dogs, and to this whole town. Don't stop. Keep training. Keep healing. Open that place you dream about. Call it whatever you want. But make sure kids like you know they're not alone. You're not just part of the pack now. You're the leader. With love, Ethan." 1 year later, the old barn had been transformed. A bright new sign hung above its wide double doors, the Legacy Center, Animal Therapy and Healing for Kids. In memory of Ethan Brooks, he kept his promise. Inside, laughter echoed. Children played beside dogs, some shy at first, others beaming. Grace, now 10, stood at the front of the group, her voice clear and strong. "Today, we're learning how to build trust, just like Ethan taught me." Outside, the 14 German shepherds, older, wiser, rested in the sun, watching over the place they helped create. Guardians, always. As the sun dipped behind the hills of Grace Hill, casting a golden glow over the Legacy Center, Grace stood at the gate with Luna by her side. She looked out at the town that had once feared them, now united by the love and loyalty of 14 remarkable dogs, and one promise kept. What started as silence became a symphony of second chances. Ethan may be gone, but his legacy breathes in every paw print across that yard, in every child who learns to trust again, and in the voice Grace now carries with pride. If this story touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up. Leave a comment with your thoughts or your own story of healing. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss another powerful tale of hope, loyalty, and the bond between humans and animals. This is Guardians of Grace Hill, where love leaves paw prints that never fade.